Hello everyone, today we'll be painting and weathering the high-grade Universal Sentry Zaku 2F2 from Gundam 0083. The kit is from 2010 and I think it still holds up pretty well. Articulation isn't anything too crazy, but that is to be expected given its age and chunkier dimensions. The kit does come with several weapons, including a redesigned Zaku machine gun, as well as the MMP-80 machine gun you typically see with Dom-type mobile suits. The Heat Hawk is also slightly bigger, which just looks cool. I wasn't the biggest fan of this Zaku redesign at first, but this one has definitely grown at me. As you've seen, the kit was primed and given a coat of Tamiya TS42 light gunmetal, which is pretty much routine. The green color is German Field Grey, which is one of my favorite colors. I like using it mainly for weapon magazines, but I'm using it for the base coat because I really want this Zaku to look military. I've been doing a lot with brighter colors, mainly because I can, and adding the military feel with weathering, but the Zaku F2 really looks tank-like, so I'm taking that concept and just going with it. At first, I thought of using a pale green, sort of like the anime colors at first, but I really like the darker look of the Field Grey. I wanted to paint some camouflage, and I've decided on using another shade of green. I knew that I didn't want a green that was just a lighter or darker version of the Field Grey. I felt that if that were the case, the two shades would just blend together, and I wanted some contrast. This green is darker in value, but it's also more saturated, so I am getting the contrast that I wanted. I'm not sure if I would use this paint as a base coat, but I think it works pretty well when used in smaller amounts, like the camouflage you're seeing, or as an accent color. While painting this camouflage, I'm trying not to use a lot of curves. It's important to think about the scale our subject is in, and how someone in 1 to 1/44 scale would paint something like this. They wouldn't be able to do large sweeping curves, so keeping things a little jagged helps. That being said, Gunpla is about entirely fictional subjects, so just do what you like. And although I've put out 2 relatively recent videos featuring camouflage on Gunpla, it's something that's in the minority of my builds. Part of this is because I think it's a little hard taking a camouflage pattern and translating it into something humanoid. Tanks are a bit easier because if you simplify things, a tank is just a box. There's lots of flat surfaces and angular bits, especially in modern vehicles, but something like this Zaku has arms and legs as well as being pretty curved, and I think the curved surfaces are what makes it difficult for a camouflage pattern to look right. And this camouflage pattern isn't anything new, it's just a modified version of the one I did for the Zaku half cannon. And now we're just painting the joint parts dark gray. This is something I don't really do since I like the contrast between paint and metallic, and most of the paints on these parts would rub off from the mobile suit moving anyways. But I wanted to do something a little different, and I think it'll be pretty neat to weather these areas up. And now I'm just painting the mono a custom pink color. It's time for chipping, and I like doing chipping physically. I think it's pretty realistic since you actually remove material, and I just like the process. It's pretty relaxing to destroy the paintwork you've been careful with applying. And I use 3 tools while doing so: a sanding sponge, metal tweezers, and a hobby knife. The sponge is for general edge wear. Now this is a bit you have to be careful with since you can sand down to the bare plastic. I normally use 10,000 grit sponges, but I couldn't find mine and still can't find mine, so I'm using an 8,000 grit one instead. It still works, you just have to be a little bit more delicate. And while I'm using the sponge, I'm applying no pressure at all. I'm just lightly touching it to the edges and letting it do its thing. Now we're using metal tweezers. These do a lot of work, and as you can see, I'm doing bouncing sort of motions, which creates random paint chips as well as some scratches. It helps to have as sharp of a point as possible on your tweezers so they don't remove too much paint. I'm looking to create really fine chips and using the contrast between the green and the metallic undercoat to do the work. I actually have multiple metallic colors to use as undercoats based on what I've got planned for the main color, but if you want larger areas of chipping, it may be better for you to hand paint your chips, whether with brush or with sponge. Now we're working with a hobby knife. I can get it to create standalone chips if I hit it against the model in a similar way to the tweezers, but mainly I use it to create super fine in-scale scratches. Where I was pretty carefree with the tweezers, I'm trying to be a little more deliberate with the knife, thinking about where scratches would generally occur. And it doesn't really apply to this kit, but if I was working on something with panel lines, I would also use the knife on the edges of panels and create really fine chipping effects where I think they would occur. Now I'm just using a metallic color to paint the various thruster nozzles and any larger areas I want to keep metallic. Decals are going on. They're from Bandai's various sets and they're not my favorite water slides, but I don't have an F2 specific set, and it's also the only set I have with the yellow Xeon emblems. Now I'm chipping up the decals, but only with the knife because it's the sharpest. I found that Bandai's decals like to flake off in larger chunks than my third-party ones, so I am being a little careful about this. It doesn't really apply here since my decals are pretty minimal, but I do try to match up the decal chipping to what I've got underneath. We're doing a pin wash, and I like using this stuff out of the bottle because it's at the perfect consistency. It's thin enough to get into the details, but not too thin where it will flow out of them. I've always had this problem when I've tried making my own washes, but if you're good at making your own, go for it. This isn't the best example since there aren't really any panel lines, but if you need to clean up a wash, try moving your brush at a 90-degree angle towards the panel line instead of following it. If you follow the panel line while cleaning up a wash, you have the chance of removing everything, but if you move your brush at a 90-degree angle, you can actually push the excess wash into the panel line, which means less applications on your end. And always make sure to clean things up from the outside inwards if that makes sense. It just looks better in my opinion. Admittedly, this isn't the best kit to show this, but it's something I actually found out pretty recently and just wanted to share. I'll surely talk about this again when I do something where I can demonstrate this effect better. I gave the model a coat of semi-gloss when that dried, and now we're doing a winter camouflage. Yep, this kit gets two different camouflage patterns. My approach so far has been pretty tank inspired, so we're continuing this by giving it a white wash. This style of camouflage is really messy as whitewash washes off when in contact with water. If you're into clean builds, you may have to sit down while watching this part. Now, this part of the whitewash is something I actually wouldn't do if I was doing this again. I only really include the footage for continuity and to give me more time to talk about it. So what you're seeing is me brushing on a heavily thinned coat of white paint and just letting it pool and get all gross. My thought process at the time was that if I painted a winter camouflage that didn't cover the entire model, I would still have something to tie it all together. It was an interesting idea, but the execution just wasn't there. This is also my first time doing this sort of winter camouflage, although I have done winter things in the past. I don't really like doing tests beforehand on things like spoons or plastic card because it doesn't simulate things the way an actual model does. I'd rather test out things on camera and just share my findings with you all. Now, round 2 of the winter camouflage. You can see how gross this thing dried, and now we're doing the actual camouflage. I decided on a whitewash covering the entire surface, minus the joints, and I'm just covering the entire model with paint. It is thinned out, but not as much as what I did before. But as the paint is drying, I'm removing it from the model, using vertical brush strokes to simulate the effects of gravity. It's something I've never done before, and I really like how it looks. I'm creating weathering as I'm painting, which saves time and takes the guesswork out a bit. I feel white is a tricky paint to weather, and focusing on how the paint erodes versus layering colors on top of it is a pretty safe approach. A great part about this is that if I don't like how it looks, I can just repaint things. All this is being done as the paint is drying, so putting on a little extra paint won't hurt things too much. The second coat of white has dried, and I wanted to eat away at it even more. All of my nice fine metallic chips were covered by the white, so I want to make up for it. I'm just dipping a stiff brush in water and scrubbing off the paint. I'm mainly using vertical motions once again to simulate the effects of gravity, but it's not an exact rule. I do try to focus on edges, but generally I just turn my brain off and scrub. Like I said before, this is supposed to be pretty messy, as real life examples were. Not only is whitewash water soluble, oftentimes it was applied with whatever soldiers could get their hands on. I like this also because I can expose the layers underneath, which has a really cool effect. In some spots like that leg, I can see the camouflage underneath, both colors of it, and even some of the metallic edgeware if I scrub enough to expose it. For something like this, showing the different layers helps tell a story and gives the impression that the Zaku has been around for a little while. One thing to note is that painting the white over a semi-gloss surface really helped with the removing it. If you want to do a similar thing, using a semi-gloss beforehand is probably the one thing I would say is an absolute must. Normally when I edit videos, I cut down footage to generally line up with how long I'm speaking for, but I'll leave much more of this footage in. I think the deteriorated whitewash is sort of the main point of interest for this project, and I just like seeing the transformation take place, so here's more footage of that. Now I'm just painting the missile pods that go on the legs. I know I did include footage of painting the other weapons, but this is the same color I used for the machine guns, and just like the Zaku itself, I did some physical chipping. I also gave the missile pods a whitewash, but I wanted this one to be a little different from what the Zaku has. I wanted to give the impression that these were painted at a different point than the main body of the Zaku itself. I do some similar things like using the dry brush to remove parts of the white paint, but it kinda looks a little different, and that's what I wanted. I'm just applying a light gray wash. It does the usual things a wash does, just in light gray, and I'm only putting it in places I think would cast the most shadows. I do also use it to knock back any of the white that accumulated in the recessed areas and I felt needed to be dealt with. I really like using light gray on white. It provides some contrast, but it's not too crazy as maybe like a brown or especially a black would be. I wanted to do a little weathering on the joint areas and all the other pieces which are dark gray, so I'm just using some brown acrylic for that. It's sort of a combination between a filter and a wash and is pretty basic, but works to show general debris and gunk. All of the areas which don't have a whitewash get it, and after this, I'll be giving the model a coat of flat clear. The model has a flat surface, so now I'll be using some glossy effects to add a little variety and break things up a bit. I'm doing some very light streaking effects to show oil or grease which came out through these slots. Would grease show up on the outside armored surfaces instead of being trapped in the inner frame? Well, your guess is as good as mine, but I like the way it looks, so I'm just doing it. And then I just use the same glossy paint for some speckling, which adds some more visual texture but is subtle at the same time. You only really notice it if you hold the model up to the light. It's always nice to have a touch of gloss on a flat surface, and this is a technique I do on every project. I like it that much. Because the model is sort of weathered, I wanted to add some mud. I really felt it would fit the winter aesthetic. Now this is just a mixture of some pigment and some dark brown paint. I don't really have a ratio, I just mix the two until I had something I figured I could work with. I am being pretty restricted with this, mainly because I want to keep things in scale and I don't want giant clumps of mud on the sides of the feet, and I do some speckling with it to get some splashed mud effects. And here it is. I actually haven't done that much with winter subjects, so I was a little unsure and actually thought about dropping the whitewash midway through, but I'm glad I stuck with it. It's not perfect, but it was a pretty good learning experience. And once again, this isn't a tutorial to show you what exactly to do, but rather an insight onto my process. Thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you in the next video, whenever that is.